Have you ever felt like you're growing, yet somehow not becoming yourself? As if time is moving, years passing, your body changing, your responsibilities multiplying, but deep inside, something essential remains untouched, unfinished, unresolved. Like a child wearing shoes too big, stumbling forward, trying to look confident, trying to fit into a life that doesn't quite feel shaped around you. There is a strange and quiet ache in that feeling, the sense that who you are on the outside is not the same as the person whispering inside your chest. You learned very early how to exist. Before you could speak, you studied faces. Before you understood words, you understood tone. You watched how the world reacted to you. The smiles, the sighs, the raised voices, the gentle hands. These were your first lessons in identity, not from books or teachers, but from the subtle language of approval and disappointment. And slowly, you began to sculpt yourself into the version that felt safest. Maybe you learned that being loud was dangerous. Maybe you learned that being quiet made you invisible. Maybe you realized that being helpful earned love, or that being strong prevented abandonment. And so, you became those things not because they were you, but because survival asked for it. Childhood is not just memory, it is architecture, and you live inside what you built there. Psychologists call this development, but that word feels too clean, too gentle, for what it truly is. Development is not just growth, it is adaptation. It is the nervous system deciding what version of you is allowed to exist. It is the subconscious learning what parts must be hidden, softened, exaggerated, or silenced. It is the invisible script that writes your adulthood long before you understand you are reading from it. You can be 12, 19, 27, 40, and still feel unfinished. Because physical maturity is inevitable, emotional maturity is not. The body grows because biology demands it. The self grows only when it is allowed to, when it is safe to. And for many, safety never came. So you walk through life wearing a self that feels like clothing, comfortable at times, heavy at others. You play roles, you perform identities, you become who you learned you needed to be. But beneath that there is a quieter you, a soft voice, a flicker, an echo. The original self, the one who was never given the chance to fully form. To understand who you are today, you must return to where that self was first shaped, not to dwell in the past, but to trace the blueprint of your becoming. This journey does not begin with adulthood. It begins with childhood in the first small rooms where the unfinished self was born. Before you knew words, before you could understand anything about the world, you understood one truth: how you were held. A newborn doesn't question whether they deserve love, they simply reach for it. The response they receive becomes the first mirror they ever see themselves in. And so your identity began not with choices, but with reactions, the world reacting to your existence. Imagine a child crying, not out of manipulation, not out of strategy, but out of pure need. In one home, a caregiver hears the cry and comes gently. The child learns, in a language older than thought, my needs are valid, I am worth responding to. The nervous system relaxes, safety becomes familiar, the world feels like something that can support them. Now, imagine another child, whose cry echoes unanswered in a silent room. Or worse, met with irritation. The child learns something entirely different. My needs are a burden, my voice disrupts, love must be earned. That lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It becomes the architecture of adulthood, invisible, but everywhere. This is attachment theory, yes, but it is also poetry, carved into the nervous system. We like to think we grow up and become new, but the truth is that we simply grow taller, around the same emotional blueprint. The brain wires around what it experiences most. Warmth teaches openness, coldness teaches withdrawal, chaos teaches hypervigilance. And these lessons sink deeper than memory. They form instinct. You learned who you were by watching how others treated you. If your joy made others smile, you learned to shine. If your anger brought rejection, you learned to swallow it whole. If your sadness was ignored, you learned to disappear. You did not become yourself. You became what the environment allowed. Some children grow in gardens watered with affection, sunlight in every corner. They learn to trust others. They learn to trust themselves. Others grow in deserts surviving on emotional scraps, learning to read silence as language. They bloom differently. Their roots are deep, searching, starving, and it is here, in this earliest stage, that the unfinished self begins to form. A child doesn't ask, "Who am I?" They ask, without words, "Am I safe here? Am I seen? Am I allowed to be myself?" However those questions were answered becomes the emotional grammar of your entire life. You may not remember these moments, but they remember you. They speak through your reactions, your fears, your longings. They shape the self that grew and the self that didn't. And to understand how that child becomes the adult you know today, we must follow what happened next when the child learned to wear a mask to survive. Have you ever noticed how adults carry themselves like tuned instruments, precise, controlled, practiced, yet behind their eyes, something trembles, something small, something silent, something unfinished? Because the child you once were did not disappear. They learned to hide, and hiding became your personality. The child who learned that their needs were unwelcome grows into the quiet one, the one who speaks softly, stays out of the way, never asks for too much. People describe them as calm, easygoing, peaceful. But inside, there is a constant calculation. If I take up too much space, love will disappear. Silence becomes their safety, but also their loneliness. Another child learned that love was conditional, given only when they achieved, performed, impressed. So they grew into the achiever, the perfectionist, the one who always has to hold everything together. They wear competence like armor. They move through life, collecting accomplishments like a shield against the terror of being ordinary. Everyone admires them. No one sees how exhausted they are. They have never known rest, because rest feels like being nothing. This is where the mask begins, not as deception, but as survival. The mask is the version of you that ensured you stayed loved, or at least stayed safe. And it works. It protects. But it also costs. Because behind the mask is the shadow, the parts of you that were never allowed to exist. The anger you swallowed, the sadness you hid, the joy you dimmed, the need for closeness you pretended you didn't have. The shadow is not your darkness, it is your abandonment. It is everything that was exiled in order to belong. Psychologists say personality is adaptive, but what they often don't say is that adaptation can become a cage. You build yourself around what others needed from you, and after enough years, you forget there was ever anything beneath it. You call the mask just who I am. You say, I'm just quiet. I'm just driven. I don't need much. But these are not truths. These are scars spoken as identity. The tragedy is not that we create masks. Masks are necessary. The tragedy is when we never learn to take them off. Because the mask shields you from rejection, but it also shields you from being known. It protects your heart, but it also isolates it. And one day, you realize something terrifying. You have spent your whole life trying to be who you needed to be, not who you are. To understand why this mask feels so hard to remove, we must look deeper into the mind's architecture itself, where memory, attachment, and identity are woven into the very wiring of the brain. What if the person you call yourself is not a single being, but an ongoing construction project, one that began before you ever had words, and continues, quietly, even now? The mind is not a fixed monument. It is more like a city built at night, endlessly rearranging itself, bricks moving behind the walls, pathways forming and fading, and you walk through it every day without knowing who laid the stones. Attachment theorist John Bowlby suggested that your earliest relationships form the blueprint for love. Not just romantic love, but how you love yourself, how you trust others, how close you allow anyone to come. If your first experiences taught you that the world responds to your needs, your nervous system learned safety. If those same experiences taught you inconsistency, neglect, or emotional coldness, your nervous system learned to brace, to anticipate, to survive. This became your internal operating system, long before you had the language to describe it. Jean Piaget showed how a child's mind builds frameworks for understanding reality cognitive models. But what we often forget is that emotional models form too. You learned what sadness meant by how your sadness was received. You learned what anger meant by how anger was punished, ignored, or feared. Every reaction, every facial expression, every silence carved patterns into your emotional memory. And memory is not just stored in thought, it is stored in the body, in the nervous system. Neuroscience calls this emotional imprinting. A child who felt unwanted does not simply remember being unwanted, their body remembers the posture of shrinking, their breath remembers the habit of holding, their heart remembers the rhythm of waiting for something that never comes. Meanwhile, Erik Erikson proposed that each life stage presents a psychological task: trust, autonomy, identity, intimacy. But these stages do not pass cleanly. If trust was never truly formed, adulthood becomes a landscape of hesitation. If identity was built on approval instead of authenticity, adulthood becomes a performance without rest. Yet, the most hopeful truth in all of this is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire. Neurons fire, form new connections, reshape pathways. The stories you inherited are not final. The emotional laws you lived under are not the only laws that exist. The architecture of the self is not static. It is alive. It is listening. It is waiting. You are not finished, but to rebuild, to rewire, to return to what was lost, you must first face what was buried. Because the parts of you that did not get to grow did not disappear. They became the shadow, the silent child still waiting in the dark. Have you ever wondered why certain moments trigger you far more than they should? Why a simple silence from someone you care about can feel like abandonment? Or why a small criticism can feel like rejection? It is because part of you did not grow. Part of you stayed exactly where the pain first began. Your body grew, your voice matured, your responsibilities changed, but emotionally, a piece of you remained untouched, waiting for something it never received. Picture a house. The rooms are furnished, decorated, lived in. People enter, talk, laugh, admire. But beneath the floorboards, in a locked basement, sits a child, not crying, not screaming, just waiting, quiet, patient, unseen. That child is the part of you that was never allowed to fully exist. The part that had to step aside so the mask could function. And though you learned to walk, talk, achieve, socialize, the child in the basement never stopped needing what they needed. This is the shadow, not darkness in the moral sense, but neglected innocence. Emotional development that froze when survival became more important than authenticity. And this shadow reappears everywhere. In love, you may cling desperately, terrified of being left, or you may push people away before they get close enough to hurt you. In friendships, you may overgive to feel needed or withdraw to avoid the fear of being known. In achievement, you may chase success endlessly, not for joy, but to silence the voice that whispers, "You are not enough." You may appear strong, capable, admired while inside. The emotional age remains young. A child trying to understand why love felt distant. A child trying to earn affection that should have been unconditional. A child trying to feel worthy in a world that first taught them they were not. And yet, nobody sees this. Not because you hide it, but but because you became so skilled at survival that even you forget it is there. You call your clinginess loyalty. You call your emotional distance independence. You call your anxiety productivity. You call your emotional numbness being mature. The mask does not just cover the shadow, it justifies it. But the body remembers, the nervous system remembers. The unfinished self knocks from the inside, asking to be acknowledged. It shows up as loneliness in a crowded room, as emptiness after success, as fear during love, as exhaustion from pretending. There is no shame in this. The shadow is not your failure, it is your proof that you survived. But survival is not living, and the child in the basement cannot stay there forever. To understand why we keep these patterns, why we protect them, and why the world encourages them, we must look at the society that rewards the mask and fears the truth underneath. Have you ever noticed how the world applauds you most when you are least yourself? When you are composed, efficient, controlled, agreeable, when you don't cry in public, when you don't ask for help, when you don't show the parts of you that tremble. Society has a strange admiration for the emotionally silent, not because silence is peaceful, but because silence is convenient. From childhood, you were taught this without ever being told. The quiet child was praised for being well-behaved, but no one asked whether they were quiet because they were scared. The child who never complained was admired for being so mature, but no one wondered whether they learned early that expressing pain pushes people away. The overachieving student was celebrated trophies, certificates, and applause. But no one questioned whether every accomplishment was fueled by the terror of being unseen if they ever stopped performing. And so, an invisible lesson spread beneath your skin. Your value is measured by how well you perform, not by how deeply you feel. Society praises productivity more than emotional maturity. It celebrates success stories, but seldom asks what was sacrificed to build them. Work over well-being, confidence over honesty. Strength over vulnerability. The world does not want your truth, it wants your function. Media reinforces this every day. We are shown images of the self-made, the always confident, the never shaken, people who have it all together, people who seem untouchable, and you compare yourself to them, forgetting that every mask looks perfect from a distance. You forget that no one films the nights they break down quietly in the dark, or the mornings they cannot get out of bed. Society sells perfection, but hides the cost, so you learn to act. You smile when you're hurting because smiling is easier than explaining. You say, "I'm fine," because the world moves too fast to stop and listen. You show your strength because vulnerability has no place in a society that turns struggle into spectacle. But here is the quiet tragedy. The more the world rewards the mask, the more the self beneath it starves. You begin to believe that your worth is conditional. Conditional on your stability, conditional on your silence, conditional on your performance. You forget that you were born worthy before you ever proved anything. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mask stops being something you wear and becomes something you are. At least, that's what you tell yourself. But masks are heavy, and even the strongest arms grow tired. To understand the weight this creates inside you, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the emotional hunger, we must now step into the cost of this performance. The quiet suffering that follows. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and still felt profoundly alone? Not because you lacked company, but because you were not there, only the version of you that knew how to smile, nod, and say the right things. There is a loneliness that does not come from being abandoned by others, but from abandoning yourself. And sometimes, that loneliness is the quietest and deepest wound a person can carry. When you spend years being who you had to be, rather than who you are, something inside you begins to fade. At first, it's subtle. You forget what your real laugh sounds like. You lose track of the things that once made you excited for no reason. You stop recognizing your own preferences, what you like, what you want, what you need. And one day, you hear yourself say, "I don't know who I am anymore." and it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels true. The nervous system cannot lie. When you betray the self to maintain the mask, the body responds with tension, anxiety, exhaustion. Your shoulders stay tight, your chest feels heavy, your breath becomes shallow. You live in a constant state of being on, as if you're always preparing for something, preparing to be acceptable, preparing to avoid rejection, preparing not to break. And yet, break you do silently, internally. The loneliness becomes a kind of echo. The anxiety becomes a hum beneath every moment. The emotional numbness creeps in like fog, dimming both joy and sorrow. Because when you suppress one emotion, you suppress them all. The shadow becomes heavier. The child in the basement grows tired of waiting. Think of a house built on unstable ground, elegant walls, polished windows, everything appearing intact. But the foundation is cracked. Over time, the cracks spread. Doors no longer close properly. Floors tilt. The structure groans in the night. You are that house. Your life may look fine. People may admire your strength. But strength built on self-abandonment is not resilience, it is erosion. One of the most painful experiences a person can have is realizing that the life they built does not feel like it belongs to them. You can have friendships, love, success, and still feel like a guest inside your own existence. And this is not because you are lost, it is because you have never been allowed to arrive. But the story does not end here. The unfinished self is not gone. The foundation can still be rebuilt. The child in the basement can still be brought back into the light. The question is not, can you change? The real question is, are you willing to meet the parts of yourself you once had to leave behind? Have you ever considered that the person you are now may not be the one who needs healing, but the child inside you who never got to finish becoming themselves? Healing is not about fixing something broken. It is about returning to someone forgotten. The self you hid, the one you protected, the one you silenced, not out of weakness, but out of survival. That self is still waiting for you. Reparenting does not mean blaming those who raised you. It means taking responsibility for offering yourself now what you once needed most. Safety, permission, patience. You learn to say to yourself the words you once longed to hear. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to want. You are allowed to exist without proving anything. At first, these words may feel foreign, even uncomfortable, because your nervous system has only known conditional acceptance. But slowly, something inside begins to thaw. Inner child work is not sentimental, it is somatic. You learn to recognize the moments when a small, frightened version of you takes control, when a partner is late and you feel abandoned, when someone is upset and you feel responsible, when you are complimented and feel undeserving. Instead of shaming yourself, you pause, you breathe, you ask gently, "How old do I feel right now?" And you answer not with judgment, but with care. Dialectical self-acceptance means holding two truths at once. You did what you had to do to survive, and now you deserve more than survival. You don't have to destroy the mask. The mask kept you safe. You thank it, but you no longer let it speak for you. You learn emotional language slowly, patiently naming feelings not as weaknesses, but as signals. Fear means you care. Anger means a boundary was crossed. Sadness means something mattered. Your emotions are not problems to eliminate. They are messengers returning home after years of silence. And boundaries, they stop being lines you draw against others and become lines you draw for yourself, not to push people away, but to make space where the real you can breathe. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with handles only you can choose to open. Healing is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not happen in a single breakthrough moment. It is slow, like learning to walk again. It is gentle, like speaking to a child. It is ongoing, like tending a garden that was once left untended for too long. The goal is not to become someone new. It is to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. And now that you are returning to yourself, there is only one step left to understand what it truly means to become whole. Have you ever realized that life doesn't hand you your identity? It asks you to build it. Not once, but over and over again. We are not statues carved in stone, finished and unchanging. We are rivers moving, reshaping, widening, deepening. And yet, for so long, you believed you were supposed to already know exactly who you are, that if you didn't, you were somehow behind. But hear this clearly, you are not behind, you are becoming. The unfinished self was never a flaw, it was an invitation. There is a moment in adulthood where you suddenly see yourself not as the roles you play, not as the expectations you carry, but as the quiet being underneath, the original you, the one who felt deeply, the one who hoped, the one who dreamed before dreaming became a risk. That self is not gone, only waiting. And when you begin to live as that self, even if just in small breaths, gentle acts, subtle choices, something shifts. The world no longer feels like something that happens to you, but something you move with. You stop performing and start participating. You stop chasing worth and start living from it. The mask loosens, the shadow softens. The child looks up. This journey is not linear. Healing is not a single sunrise. There will be days when the old patterns return, when fear speaks louder than courage, when you forget that growth takes time. And on those days, you must remember, progress is not measured in how far you travel, but in how gently you return to yourself when you drift away. To become who you truly are is not to invent something new, it is to uncover what survived. The self that endured loneliness, the self that learned silence but never forgot song, the self that waited for you patiently while you lived for others. You are walking back to that self now. And adulthood, real adulthood, is not about independence or achievement. It is about learning how to hold your own heart with the care you once wished someone else had given you. To grow is not to move on from your past, but to walk with the parts of you that were left behind and say, I see you, I hear you, come with me. So when you feel lost, pause, breathe, listen inward. You are not failing, you are not late, you are not broken, you are becoming. And the most beautiful part of becoming is this. You have the power, from this moment forward, to choose who you are. Not based on fear, not based on survival, but based on truth. The unfinished self is waiting to step into the light. Let it.